Welcome to the explainer that's basically going to shatter everything you thought you knew about the ancient caveman. I mean, we all have this mental image, right? A stressed out stick figure perpetually running from saber-toothed tigers, starving, just barely scraping by. Well, prepare to have your mind totally blown, because actual anthropology tells a wildly different story. It turns out early humans weren't constantly on this hardcore 24/7 survival grind. Actually, they had an overwhelming amount of free time.
Seriously, think about it for a second. Before the internet, before writing, before farming was even a concept, what did human beings actually do with their brains when they had absolutely zero to do? I mean, as a guy who reflexively pulls out his phone the millisecond an elevator door closes, this question kind of haunts me. Did they just sit around staring at rocks? Did cavemen even get bored? And if they did, how did they handle it without an algorithm force-feeding them short-form content to numb the silence? Okay, let's kick things off with a massive, myth-busting number, 15. We usually assume early humans were out there min-maxing their daily routines, just trying to stay alive. But anthropologists went out and studied surviving hunter-gatherer societies, and they found something totally insane. A lot of these groups only worked 15 to 20 hours a week. Yeah, you heard that right. Not a day, a week. The rest of the time, wide open. I mean, they literally had significantly more free time than almost any modern corporate worker today. And they didn't even have a digital calendar to schedule it. And that brings us to anthropologist Marshall Sahlins and his incredibly famous original affluent society theory. Sahlins basically realized that early humans unlocked this massive free time glitch in the universe. See, because they didn't care about hoarding material wealth or generating some artificial surplus, they just met their immediate caloric needs, completely trusted nature's insanely rich environment to provide for tomorrow, and then they just chilled out. They achieved total affluence without actually needing abundance. Honestly, it's kind of the ultimate life hack. Now, to be fair, modern scholars do push back on Sahlins a bit, and rightly so. He kind of glossed over the massive amount of time it took to actually prepare that food, not to mention the harsh realities of high infant mortality and disease. So, okay, it wasn't exactly a perfect, pristine utopia. But here is the absolute kicker. Even when you add up all those extra chores and survival logistics, ancient humans still clocked way fewer working hours than your average dual-income household today. They had serious, undeniable downtime. Section 1. The power of play. So, with their basic needs met and these huge blocks of free time, human brains didn't just shut down. For a long time, the surplus energy theory basically guessed that we played just to burn off extra steam because, well, we had nothing better to do. But then Carl Groos dropped this much deeper Darwinian theory. He argued that animals don't play just because they happen to be young. Actually, it's the reverse. Evolution literally programmed a prolonged youth phase into us specifically so we could play. Play is basically a biological cheat code for learning really complex survival skills without, actually dying in the process. And here's what that actually looks like out in the real world. In hunter-gatherer societies, kids were completely free range. No helicopter parents, no mandatory homework, none of that. They just engaged in imitative play all day long. Researchers actually watched 3-year-old girls doing this play pounding with sticks, perfectly mimicking the older women crushing grain. And by the time they were 8 and had to do it for real, their muscle memory was completely locked in. They literally played their way into getting a job. They effortlessly acquired life or death skills just by goofing off. Section 2. Boredom, the innovation engine. But what happens when an already intelligent adult brain completely masters its environment and gets incredibly bored? Well, let's look at the capuchin monkeys on the island of Jicaron, because honestly, things get pretty wild. These guys live in a predator-free VIP lounge. They're at the very top of the food chain, which means survival is basically a solved game for them. With all that leftover brain power, they had a massive cognitive surplus. So what did they do with it? Well, they invented stone tools to smash shellfish, which is an insane evolutionary leap, but they also invented a culturally transmitted tradition of recreational baby kidnapping. Yeah, you heard me, just for the drama. So that incredibly dark comedy punchline actually reveals a terrifying truth about brains. Intelligence is relentlessly restless. When you have cognitive surplus, which is basically mental energy with nowhere productive to go, boredom forces extremely complex innovation. But the thing is, intelligence doesn't inherently care if those innovations are actually good, bad, or completely morally bankrupt. It just aggressively demands stimulation to keep from going crazy. Luckily for us, humans had a massive leg up on the kidnapping monkeys.
We developed the ability to actually evaluate what our restless brains were coming up with. As the famous quote goes, "Play, not necessity, is the mother of invention." Think about it. Necessity builds the absolute bare minimum you need for survival. But our cognitive surplus, that allowed us to tinker, to turn toys into actual tools, and to weaponize our intense boredom to create massive, world-altering progress.
Section 3. Ancient Art and Music.
And this brings us right to the hard archaeological evidence of all this ancient free time, the birth of the arts. Just look at the sheer scale of this timeline for a second. We're talking 51,000-year-old narrative cave art in Indonesia, 50,000-year-old Neanderthal bone flutes, Siberian swan bone flutes from 40,000 years ago, and Chinese guadi flutes from 7 millennia ago. Guys, this isn't some random historical fluke. This is the human brain obsessively playing with visual and auditory patterns simply because it had the downtime and a desperate need to process something other than pure survival.
So why did they paint? Anthropologists have come up with all these grand, sophisticated theories, right? Like, oh, it was utilitarian hunting magic to manifest food, or they were in these deep psychedelic shamanic trances. But I gotta say, my absolute favorite theory comes from researcher R. Dale Guthrie. Based on the sizes of the handprints left on the walls, he argues that a massive chunk of cave art was literally just bored teenage boys hanging out in caves, drawing edgy, high-risk hunting scenes and naked women. I mean, truly, humanity never changes.
And then there's music. The Divye Babe flute dates back roughly 50,000 to 60,000 years. Just imagine the scenario. At some point, an early human, or maybe even a Neanderthal, picks up the literal femur of a cave bear. They grab a stone tool and they deliberately carve artificial holes into it. Not to stab anything, not for any kind of tactical advantage. They did it just to create a weird sound to fill the dead air of a totally uneventful Tuesday afternoon.
And these weren't just crude, accidental things either. If you look at the close-up details on Paleolithic instruments, like those swan bone flutes from Siberia, the craftsmanship is wildly refined and deliberate. It required a highly advanced, intentional tool use, driven by absolutely nothing but musical curiosity and pure cognitive surplus. They weren't just making noise out there. They were meticulously engineering joy out of pure, unadulterated boredom.
Section 4. Have we killed boredom?
So if absolute boredom was the engine that built our greatest innovations, what happens when we completely eradicate it? Let's trace the historic chain reaction real quick. It basically goes like this. Step 1. Idle time sitting around a fire with literally nothing to do. Step 2. That idle time gives birth to imagination, picturing a reality that doesn't actually exist yet. Step 3. Imagination births storytelling. And step 4. Sharing those stories builds the deep tribal trust required to form a cooperative civilization. The entire modern world essentially started with doing absolutely nothing.
Neurologically speaking, this doing nothing state is actually called the brain's default mode. It demands zero input. It's this sacred, empty mental space where your brain gets to reflect, process complex emotions, and connect random, totally unrelated dots to generate your absolute best ideas. But today, well, we've basically assassinated the default mode. We've crammed every single empty second of our lives with a barrage of apps, shorts, and push notifications, completely starving our brains of the blank space where creativity actually lives.
And so I'm leaving you with this final, lingering thought. Our ancestors used their empty time to invent art, music, tools, and literal society. If humanity's absolute greatest achievements were born from having absolutely nothing to do, what exactly is our era of endless algorithmic scrolling going to leave behind? Thanks so much for checking out this explainer. Seriously, do me a favor, take 5 minutes today, put the phone in another room, and just stare at a wall. Let yourself be profoundly bored. You might just invent something incredible.